there are two important ideas or thoughts that I would like to, or that we would like to communicate tonight. And it's the size and the positive impact of Bitcoin in Texas. Okay, so I want people to get a feel for how mainstream it is in Texas, because when it comes to Bitcoin, it's easy for us to think of ourselves, right? It's our box, it's our world. We just think about whether or not we're going to buy Bitcoin and whether or not we're going to benefit from buying Bitcoin. And it isn't just about each of us deciding to buy some. It's much bigger than that. And when we understand this, it gives us a broader and better understanding of Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is bigger than each one of us deciding to buy it. And so understanding what's happening across Texas starts to help us see that. And it gives us things to talk about. And it nudges us further down the path of adopting it. Helps us better understand it. Helps us talk about it with our friends and family. That Bitcoin is much bigger than the individual decision to buy. Much bigger. And there's a lot happening in Texas. And so that's what we want to communicate, in the first part of the discussion, is that. The second part doesn't have as long of a description, is this year's legislative session and the TBC, and the work that they do and the members at the state capitol, and really getting across how important that is to achieve number one, because the work that the TBC has done to clear the path to make Texas a welcoming state to Bitcoin is really quite extraordinary. So to give you a look behind the curtain. And so ask questions as we go, as they pop in, because we're going to go right up to the end. We're not going to leave time at the end, because I think we have so much to talk about. So just ask as we go, as they pop up. But we're going to do, sort of Bitcoin mainstream in Texas. We'll do economic impact, energy grid impact, environmental impact, and even speculate about the future. Okay. So that's sort of the first part. And then the next part is this year's legislation, the most valuable Bitcoin bills. Why are they valuable? What's the current status? Will they pass? Will they not? Who's for them and who's against them and why, type of a stuff. So, and we got the TBC film in here. So everybody turn around and say, hi, Mom.
Hello.
That's probably a boomer thing, even though I'm not a boomer, but that's what they used to do on TV. Okay, with that, I'll welcome Lee and Christine. I was going to call you Kathleen. I was like, that's not right. And Steve, to the same. In the chairs. Okay, first, just go ahead, introduce yourselves. What's your role? Good on PBC and whatever else you want to say.
Howdy, everyone. I'm Christine Cranley, Director of Business Development at the Texas Blockchain Council, newest member on the team.
Hey, good evening, guys. I'm Lee Bratcham, the president of TBC. I want to just first recognize John. I consider John a friend and someone who has been a mentor for several years before the TBC even started. So John was on the original board of the TBC, and I just have tremendous respect for him and his opinion. And so
thanks, Lee.
Much appreciative for inviting us. The other thing that I wanted to mention is just to draw attention to the TBC team and the hard work. Christine, Steve, Amy, Ryan, Sohail, Tyler, everybody who's in the room. They put in a lot of hours and they go to a lot of stuff. They go to Austin a lot. And so I just wanted to make sure to mention that at the outset, is just appreciate y'all's efforts. So.
Hi, Sheree. My name is Steve Kennard. My focus at the Texas Blockchain Council is Bitcoin mining. I was an energy professional by background, and I am president of the Bitcoin Mining Foundation, which is a 501c3 that Lee serves on the board of, and that is kind of another part of the story here in our effort to bring more institutional engagement with Bitcoin mining, which is a big area of focus for us. So wearing both hats.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so a couple of questions to further introduce the TBC and probably a little bit more background. And I think by my calculation, it's 3 years old. almost to the day. It's like really close right around here.
Yeah.
So we'll start with Lee, but just real quick, why did you start it? Because you're the major key instigator of the whole thing. But what was the inspiration? Why'd you start it?
Sure. Yeah, so we were having meetings with local elected officials. John was a part of many of those meetings. And I realized they have, first of all, no idea what this technology is. And second of all, they had some bad experiences in the past with people who, in any emerging industry, there's going to be people that are grifters or unsavory. And so a lot of these elected officials had some bad experiences, and maybe really early on, they weren't representative of the industry as a whole. And so when I saw that mismatch, I saw, okay, you're just off this one bad experience, you're discounting this technology and this incredible community. That needs to change. And so the TBC was an avenue through which we could really show Texas and Texas elected officials what this industry can do for Texas as far as job creation, tax revenue, the well-being of different communities, and to get some stuff done for the companies in Texas that were really struggling to get anything done in the halls of power, whether that's in Austin or city councils or even in DC.
And did anyone laugh at you, or?
I don't know if anyone laughed, but there's probably a lot of people
rolled
that,
their eyes.
Yeah, there's a lot of people
wasting your time.
A lot of people that told me that there's no need for this, or why, there's this blockchain association in DC. What we don't like, there's two associations in DC actually, Digital Chamber and Blockchain Association. What they don't really seem to appreciate is pretty much all the innovation that has happened from a policy perspective over the last, since ever, it's been at the state level. The federal government has not acted, and if they've acted, it's been in a way that harms innovation. It pushes innovation offshore. So, people that think that all this power resides in DC are sorely mistaken. A lot of that power resides at the state level. And Texas, being the largest state, second largest state by population and geographic size, has outsized influence to be able to push that model legislation on other states. They're all waiting to see what Texas passes. And granted, we copied a little bit from Wyoming. Yes, that's true. But Wyoming is the smallest state by population, not by geography. And our economy is 40 times their size. So nobody's really following Wyoming's lead on this stuff. They need to follow a state that has serious economic heft.
And then one more question for all of you, I guess. But looking back at your time at the TBC, what's the biggest surprise? Whether you were watching it from afar or just joined, sort of like in terms of the direction it took or what it accomplished or what happened, or is there anything that sort of sticks out in terms of, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that?
Yeah, I'll go with the sticks out portion of the question. My background was as an oil and gas professional. I really didn't become what I would think of as a Bitcoiner till fairly recently. I was more an energy professional interested in the arbitrage opportunity of an energy consumer that you could move to where you needed it. In the company I had been in, we had stranded natural gas, and I just knew what a headache that was and how prevalent it is in the oil field. And so I started from a standpoint of, this is probably a scam, and I just need to figure out why that's the case so that I can warn other people not to do it. And then obviously I 180'd on that after spending most of COVID studying about this. But what sticks out in the kind of timeline of that progression, at least in my own personal experience, was June of 2021, because that was when China banned Bitcoin mining. So I was in the middle of trying to figure this stuff out. I was a relatively early member to the TBC. I don't know if I was first 10, but early days, because I just wanted to learn, and it was kind of part of my due diligence. But I think that forever there's going to be a sort of before China ban and after China ban in Texas Bitcoin, because when China made that tremendous geopolitical blunder, all of that machinery, that industry had to find a new home immediately, because every day that you don't have it plugged in, you're literally burning money. And so it was like Wild West boom. And that was the first year that we hosted our summit in Austin. And I went to that event. And so in a couple of months, I kind of accelerated from, I don't know about this, I'm not telling anyone I'm even really reading about it, to I'm pretty sure I'm going to quit my job because this is a once in a lifetime like transformational. It's never going to happen again. And then thankfully, my wife basically said, all you talk about is Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, so you should just be doing that during the day. and then come home and be with the kids. So in order to honor her request, I called Lee, and the rest is history.
Awesome.
That's a great story. Yeah. Christine, anything come to mind?
Well, I'm not sure if it's surprise, but when I came to the space in February 2021, you know, I'm sure, like the experience of most of you, you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and you think, oh my goodness, you know, learning about sound money and the situation that we're in, and how can you not talk about it to everybody who will listen, like Steve. And so I was just moving to Texas at that time. So I started an LLC, Noah's Bitcoin, just to talk about it to anyone who'd listen and have a little credibility by having a website and a name. Eventually, pretty quickly got picked up by an RIA firm because we were one of the only ones doing Bitcoin exposure for our clients, but TBC. So I was at their very first summit, and I spent a lot of time in the space over the next 2 years, I suppose. And what always struck me about the TBC was just the professionalism with which they would do things. I would always talk about the summit as the conference that you dress up for, because the businesses are there, and just the integrity with which I always observe them to do their work. So first thing I did was I approached Lee and just said, I love what you've built and would love to be a part of it if you had a space for me. So not a surprise so much, but just what strikes me the most about the Texas Blockchain Council.
That's a great piece of story there that just is so applicable to what we're talking about. You know, did you hear what you said? That Giga Energy that's doing Bitcoin mining from stranded natural gas, they're so successful that they don't need help raising money. And that's money that's being, you know, invested in Texas. That's part of the story. That's really cool. So
they'll probably still take some money.
I'm sure they will. They just don't need to pay you. Lee, I think my biggest surprise, and it's a pleasant surprise, is the fact that the Texas Blockchain Council ends up focusing, you know, 95% on Bitcoin, because that wasn't the plan. And it even started out more by, you know, funding and that type of thing by the blockchain side. But
yeah, our first big contribution was from Hedera, which is a different layer one. No, I think how that evolved is there's different reasons why a company would join an industry association. One is you want business development options. You want to be exposed to a different part of the network. You want clients, you want investors, that part of it, right? The other is regulatory risk, and Bitcoin miners had a lot of regulatory risk, and we started to assess or to amass some experience and how to deal with regulatory risk, whether that was at ERCOT, a legislature. And so there was a lot of product market fit there, to use a often or overused term. And so the amount of revenue and the amount of need that there was on the mining side quickly outpaced anything we were doing in any other vertical. And so we leaned pretty hard into it, and turns out it was very needed, because then the mining ban happened, then the Winter Storm Uri happened, and literally we were in Rockdale with legislators that Friday when the storm was blowing in. You know, Friday was the kickoff of the storm. The ice hit first, and then the, you know, near zero temperatures. And so I remember driving out of there, everything was freezing over, driving back to Dallas. And I get a call from one of the state senators who was there, Angela Paxton, who's actually up here in North Texas state senator. She said, if this goes really south, that Bitcoin miner that we were to was the Riot facility. She was like, they're going to turn off, right? At the time, it was actually Whinstone. Riot hadn't yet acquired it. But anyways, they did turn off. But there was a lot of anxiety around grid stress, which means these miners all needed a partner to help them with their regulatory risk. So that's the story on how.
And that story ends quite well, which we're going to get to. Okay, moving on. So Bitcoin is mainstream. Point number one. We'll start with economic impact. And, you know, just off the cuff, I know you guys hear a million stories, so we just want to communicate some of them. But, and also even just, what types of companies are getting involved, because it isn't just miners, and, there's Bitcoin startups too, but I'm always amazed, and even just at the TCU, shindig that, Steve organized, just the different types of companies that are there. Yeah, so whoever wants to start, it's like the economic impact of Bitcoin in Texas, trying to paint that picture.
Yeah, I think the TCU event that we did is a good example. It's at the business school. It's an energy-focused school, and it gave us some great exposure to a pretty diverse group of institutional, professional class of peoples. During the day, it was geared towards that type of gathering. But what was interesting about it is, or the message we partially tried to convey is that if you are interested in or work in the energy industry, this affects you. And one of the timelines that we put up to try to illustrate that is kind of looking over the last 100 years, and there's a number of watershed moments where the energy industry changed forever. And so a few of those that we pointed out, I'm not saying this is an exhaustive list, but I think you'll get the idea, is, in 1902 was the Spindletop Gusher in Southeast Texas. So before that, we're a horse and buggy society. Texas is a lumber state. That changed forever on that day, right? And the next example that we gave was the commercialization of nuclear energy, because when that was created as primarily a research initiative towards, that was warfare oriented, it was impossible for anyone to, you would have seemed insane if you would claim that this will easily transition over to like retail electricity generation, and more so that energy would become so geopolitical as a function of that. So there's a before and an after inflection point. And then maybe most relevant to TCU at least, and really us in DFW, for years, it was really derided in the oil field that you could extract oil and gas from tight rock, from rock that lacked in porosity and permeability. And it wasn't until George Mitchell combined horizontal drilling with high pressure frac jobs that he cracked that code. And for years, people told him he was crazy. He almost went bankrupt. That's a whole story you should look into. But to all of us now, it just seems obvious. Like, oh yeah, in Texas, we're number one. We just passed Saudi Arabia. Not obvious. I remember when it was like, we're running out of oil. There'll be no gas. Saudi Arabia is going to rule us forever. And now we don't even talk about that. So you get people that come up with these kinds of ideas, drilling and Spindletop, whatever it may be, and you're derided as that's ridiculous. It's not going to work. Turns out actually it changed the world forever. And my strong opinion is that this is no different. And there's a before and an after inflection point that we're living through right now. At least that's what I hope the people at TCU and some of you in this room will take away, that it seems to an outside group, it's crazy, it's extreme, it's on the fringe. But what we tried to do is just provide an explanation of the underlying technology, what this does, the value proposition that's entirely unique, an energy consumer that can be moved to where you need it, that's price sensitive, and explain to me, articulate to me how that doesn't affect every energy source. I'm yet to get anybody articulate to me how that's not the case, because you can't. It didn't exist before, and now it does exist, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So my encouragement for the people in that room and here is, now that you've seen it, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to look the other way? Are we going to stamp out that innovation? Are we going to let Russia run with it? I think it's in our best interest to be a leader. And that was well received, and we'll continue to do our best to get that message out, because most of what gets out in the media is just utter nonsense that mining is doing complex calculations. And it's just, so that sounds silly. Why would you support something? So they're doing calculations and consuming all this energy. That doesn't make any sense, right? So we've tried to take the time to explain the reason that energy consumption is securing a network that's good for humanity and good for our energy economy at large. So it was a good event. We're going to continue to do it, continue to do events like this and longer form educational content. And I know I'm rambling on, but I'm going to mention as well, today was an exciting day because we plugged in a Bitcoin miner at Dallas College. And that is exactly why I wanted to come and work at the TBC, because that started at our last summit in Austin with a trustee from Dallas College that showed up there and just said, I didn't know anything about this before. This was a really cool event. How do we do this at Dallas College? And I'll spare you all of the committees and this and that and the other we had to go through. But we made it through. And that's a testament to that school system because they really are leading to do that. Even though it's just one machine, I think it's remarkable that we were able to do that and that they want to participate in having workforce development programs and teaching the next generation about this innovative technology. So it's happening, you know. I think it's inevitable once you understand how much this changes. Really anything having to do with financial services and energy.
What percent of...
That's it.
And Steve didn't mention this. He's been working this with Dallas College for months. They're actually going to custody the Bitcoin. Be the first.
Oh, nice.
Like when we did this with Fort Worth, I don't know, a year ago, 9 months ago, it's a Luxor pool. It converts. I guess we use Genesis for the cash conversion. NYDIG. So NYDIG does the custody, converts it to cash, and then sends the cash back to the city. Whereas in Dallas College's case, they will put it on the balance sheet of the institution. This is, wow. Dallas College is 120,000 students over 8 campuses.
Still a lot.
Oh, 75,000. Oh. lot of students over 8 campuses. So it's like not a small institution, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long process, but worth it. And I think it'll open up a lot more other schools to do that.
So you talked a lot about energy companies too. And it seems like about a year ago, or at some point, year and a half, there was like this aha moment in the energy industry of, oh my goodness, Bitcoin is going to get tied to energy companies. How would you answer the question, okay, what percent of energy producers are now working on driving towards thinking about Bitcoin? Is it over 50 that are now there, or is it still a small percentage that are realize that see this train coming, or what?
You know, I talk to a lot of people about that, and from what I hear, the rumblings, they're all looking at it. I have a good friend and investor that has worked for a publicly traded company for many years, 30 years, and he said they are all looking at it, but it's all behind the scenes. And so that's one thing with our organization. We become a bit of a hub for a lot of that information. We're working with schools, we're working with companies. Some of them come to us under NDA and we can't speak about it, but they're all, I'd be surprised if there's big companies that haven't looked at it, but they're not talking about it.
Yeah, I think what I might add there too is we have some machines we've donated and plugged in at A&M, and I think as we start to more publicly ramp up that collaboration, which is imminent, that's really going to be another tremendous inflection point, because the university, you know, so many former students, myself included, work in the oil field and in energy companies. I was just in Miami last week and met with one of like the largest household name companies, and the feedback was very much like the higher ups, kind of the older they are, typically they're not as open to Bitcoin, but if it's an A&M collaboration, they'll do that. But even the most skeptical, I think, are starting to realize that the answer isn't, we're not going to look at it. And that was part of the discussion at TCU as well, is you don't have to, it's not that every single company out there is going to be mining Bitcoin universally. Maybe we'll get there. I'd love to see it. But I do think there's a point in the future, not that far out there, that you will look ignorant and ridiculous if you're at an energy company and someone asks you, what's your take on Bitcoin mining? And you just laugh and say, that's silly. I remember a time not long ago, I often tell this story because it helps people in the oil field identify with it. But when electronic fracturing jobs first came to the market, that was a joke. Like people would say, oh, I'm going to start running electrify my oil field and run an e-frac crew. And it was like a laughable thing. Now, if you're not looking at it, or you go to a board meeting and say nothing about that, or like electrification in general in the oil field, it's a fireable offense. And so I think that's the same place where this is going to go, that you don't have to necessarily recommend that you mine Bitcoin, but you better understand the basic economic components of that decision-making process. And that's where we are right now, even as most of the companies don't want to admit publicly yet that they're doing it. What was your question?
my question is back in reference to Dallas College. Were you saying that they're initiating courses to teach people about this, or are they now accepting payments for courses in Bitcoin, or all of the above?
So I just learned today that they're going to have a whole certificate program that I may or may not be involved. This literally happened like a couple hours ago. That I may or may not be involved in. So I need to figure that out. But yes, there's course material forthcoming, more than I envisioned. And that's a good thing. It's awesome that they're embracing that. I just didn't, that came out of right field a little bit, but in a positive way. And then the machine itself is in a room. We're working on a press release. That's in a public place. It's a public college. So any of you can go there, and it's in a closed room that it's a fairly valuable piece of machinery. So you can't like touch it, but you can see it, and we'll have a screen with like stats on what it's, you know, the hash rate and like network hash rate and some stuff like that. So that's been another breakthrough. Like, unfortunately at A&M, it's in like this back computer lab. Nobody can go there, right? And it's a little bit harder for people to get to College Station. So I think this is going to be really cool because anyone in Dallas, Richland campus is easy to get to, just off of 2 major highways. And you can just park and walk in there.
They're not taking Bitcoin payments.
Right now, the university itself is not accepting Bitcoin payments. These proceeds will go to their foundation.
Yeah, they're just
and then
mining Bitcoin and holding it.
It's their decision. They haven't disclosed to me what their intentions are. My hope is to engage with them further, and I would love for like it to become a long-term accumulation strategy. But that's more ambitious.
But speaking of education, real quick, just to rattle it off, A&M has a Bitcoin class. They have a big research group that's researching Bitcoin, and you guys are working with.
Yep. Texas State Technical.
Yeah, Texas State. What's that one?
Texas State Technical College.
Yeah, what are they doing? They're doing
They have a ASIC repair, Bitcoin miner repair certificate. Not certificate. What's
associate degree or something?
It's a short
certification.
yeah, it's a certificate.
Yeah,
Repair
I think you call it
equipment.
It's a like basic entry level technician course, but workforce development activity. And I'm not just playing favorites because I went to A&M. I'm trying with other schools. I think we're going to advance with TCU, with a fund there that students will have. But with it hasn't gone. I will give A&M credit; they are definitely way out ahead. Yeah.
And pressing into A&M, because we've thrown it out there, but I don't know if we've clarified all the work Steve's been working on for a year to get them hashing. We got equipment down to them for their group, but we are going to be doing an initiative with them in the very near future to help fund research on Bitcoin mining, because A&M is the premier university that ERCOT looks to. It's now the largest in the country. And so we have been able to make some inroads, and we'll be making some announcements very soon in partnership with Steve's foundation, which is able to receive tax-deductible donations. So information to come, but working with the entire Bitcoin community to help fund the research that we want to see so that we can help push back against these half narratives and false narratives about how bad Bitcoin mining is, and show them research from the premier university in the country. No, it's actually good for the grid.
Back to your question, I also have an ambition for A&M's endowment to hold Bitcoin, but that remains an ambition at this point. It's a process.
Can I throw out a few stats that I think
Economic impact?
Yeah, economic impact stats.
Let's get this one.
This may be a little dry and boring, but these are things that you guys can use, I guess, as a tool when you're having conversations. So we've done some polling that was commissioned. It was third-party firm, 2% margin of error, very professional, robust poll that demonstrated that 48% of Texans under the age of 29, so 48% of Texans under the age of 29 own either Bitcoin or another digital asset. So now over the age of 65, 6%. And that line, or I guess it goes this way. As you get older, the less likely you are to own it. So that's a pretty large number. And the aggregate total is 29% of Texans, which is significantly higher than the national average. National average, there's lots of polls, but you see it anywhere from like 18 to 24%, somewhere in that range, depending on the poll. So we're much higher than the national average here in Texas. There's been 2,000 direct jobs and 20,000 1099 contractor jobs created by Bitcoin mining. We know that from some economic impact studies. And this is just a guess. We have not done any studies, but I would say that you could probably double that if you include the non-mining side of Bitcoin, like the Bitcoin startups, devs, Oshi, the Austin ecosystem. Like Voltage. I could probably rattle off a bunch of these companies. Impervious AI. Yeah. So that is not insignificant numbers of job creation for the state. And then the tax revenue is a little bit different, like a little bit more tilted towards the Bitcoin mining side because they do generate a lot more tax revenue for the state. But these startups could eventually, that's the nature of a startup, right? Maybe they don't have a lot, they have job creation, they don't have a lot of tax revenue from the state, but if they hockey stick, that's the same as Silicon Valley, right? Somebody at IT, an engineer at IT, invented the microchip.
TI.
Sorry, I said IT, I meant TI. Texas Instruments invented the microchip. And that was 68, some 50 plus years ago, right? But Silicon Valley monetized it. So Texas doesn't want to miss out on what I think and what probably many of you think is the next wave of innovation when it comes to technology, and that's assets. Bitcoin and blockchains will do for the transfer of value what the internet did for the transfer of information. How many of you have heard that phrase before, right? Well, actually not that many people, but probably half of you have heard that at some podcast at some point, right? This is as transformational as the internet. We're just really early.
Maybe to paint the picture, the story of Rockdale was at City Council.
Mm-hmm.
In response, I think we're going to get to it shortly, but we have a lot of legislation that we've been moving through that's pro the industry, and some of it has made it past the finish line, but there's been a lot of noise about a particular bill, which looks like it won't make it, but which is against our industry. And the City Council, was it, of Rockdale, which is where Riot's the largest facility in Texas, they all voted unanimously in support of the Rockdale facility because they've just seen so much economy come to their city.
Yep. Yeah, I think any questions on economic development in Texas? I mean, it's hard to paint it all in a short amount of time, but it's literally.
And if anybody wants this survey, like I just gave 2 stats from it, but we have data on, it's like 20 slides. So if anybody wants a survey on the economic impact stuff or the adoption or who owns demographics, rural, urban, all that stuff, just shoot us an email. It's publicly available. We can send it to you.
Yeah. Speaking of surveys, Bitcoin has the largest percentage of low income ownership of an asset ever in the U.S. It was, I want to say it was 25% of people with income under $50,000. Now you can ask how they could possibly do that, but it was some high number, but it was higher than any other asset, which was pretty interesting. Okay. Energy grid impact. So we'll pick up the pace, and the impact of Bitcoin on the grid has been unbelievable in terms of making it better, but explain it to this group in 5 minutes.
You want me to do that?
Yeah.
I'll try to do it in 1 minute, and then I'll let my colleagues add some color. So in Texas, there's about 2,300 megawatts worth of Bitcoin mining in Texas. That means nothing to most people, so you got to put it in context. We're between a 50,000 and 80,000 megawatt grid on a nice day today, probably closer to 50,000 on a really hot day, or a really cold day, maybe closer to 80,000 megawatts. So the percentages vary, but significant. Around 3% of any power that was used in the entire state of Texas, which is in all of ERCOT, which is 95% of Texas, right? There's part of the Panhandle, part of East Texas. It's not in ERCOT, but around 3%, give or take, is used for Bitcoin mining. So that's not an insignificant amount. Now that can kind of freak people out if you're not also able to say Bitcoin mining load, and you probably heard this a million times, but I'll be very succinct, is extremely flexible. It could be a crumple zone for the grid. And so we have a lot of data from ERCOT showing that we're price sensitive, and the energy only market in ERCOT allows those miners to see the price going up, and therefore they curtail. Price goes back down, they're back up. So it's a completely inverse relationship. So you see these graphs, and the price is up, Bitcoin mining load is down. Price starts coming back down, the load comes back up. So we need load like that because most load is inflexible. Like we go home, we turn on our AC, and everyone does it at the same time. And it gets hotter, everybody cranks the AC. So the duck curve, as Texans, we're more familiar with that because of Winter Storm Uri. Bitcoin miners are compressing the duck curve by using power overnight or times of day when most people aren't using it. So by pulling up the valleys and shaving off the peaks. So Bitcoin miners oftentimes, especially during the summer, are off from 4 p.m. to, say, 7 p.m., when our highest consumption time of the day is.
Yeah, the biggest problem for any grid is to solve for peak. Yeah. Because you got to spend money to put energy on the grid that isn't used, and no one wants to spend that money. You got to prepare for the peak that doesn't happen that frequently. So you're spending all this money to build all this capacity that doesn't get used. And when you bring something in that's flexible, you don't have to build so much energy for peak because Bitcoin will just shut off and give the energy back to the grid. And so the impact in terms of grid stability, in terms of electricity costs, it's like an amazing innovation for the energy grid. Nothing comes close to being able to instantly give energy back to the grid that way.
And for those of you that aren't energy people, this has been a total immersion in a whole new language for me as well in the last year or two. So the duck curve, right? If you think about the shape of a duck, what that means is that, think about, let's say, wind and solar, right? So it's only working when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. And so when that's happening, there's a lot of it, right? So think about the head of a duck. And in Texas, we're an unregulated market, which means that we price it differently throughout the state. And so if you're out in West Texas and it's sunny and it's windy, you've got so much power, and maybe you've even been subsidized to build out wind and solar, so your power is actually negative, right? So they're paying you, and there's nobody to take it. But then when the sun is down and the wind is not blowing, then it's the trough, right? So there's not enough of it. So Bitcoin miners, because they're location agnostic, they can come out there and plop right down and soak that up. So when Lee talks about shaving the duck curve, you probably already, most of you knew that, but that was a new word for me that I had to look up on YouTube. So you're bringing down the head of the duck, right, and pulling up the bottom so that it's more equal. And that is actually important, not just for economics and being able to get a return on investment for some of the energy infrastructure build out, but also with the grid. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about ancillary services and the way that it kind of keeps it stable.
Yeah. So ancillary services is a fancy way of saying demand response. Demand response, Bitcoin miners are able to bid in the day ahead market to say, ERCOT, we are going to be willing to turn ourselves off at any time at your discretion, and we want you to pay us a little bit to do that, right? So it's a way that ERCOT, it's a tool in ERCOT's tool belt to further stabilize the grid. And Bitcoin miners are not the only ones in ancillary services. There's a lot of other heavy industry that do it, but Bitcoin miners can bid much lower because their flexibility is much greater, right? It's a little bit more expensive for a steel mill or some heavy industry petrochemical plant to give up their power, because then they have to stop their processes and there's some sort of efficiency loss, and then they have to get it restarted again. Whereas with Bitcoin miners, there's far less friction to do that, and so they can bid lower, which costs ERCOT less. And if ERCOT pays less to procure these ancillary services, they pass lower fees on, because those fees are borne by the consumer. Like, all loads pay for ERCOT to pay for ancillary services. So if you're bidding down the price that ERCOT has to pay, then you could potentially be lowering the price of energy in any given area.
Any questions about the grid that you've heard out there, or just things you've heard you wondered about? No?
One, to paint a picture of what this looks like. So in the last storm, not the one where we had all the power outages, but the one earlier, near Christmas time, they called up us, Lee, and because ERCOT can see when the miners are on and off, and said, we've got one or two that are still on. Can you help us get them shut down? And turns out they turned off before you even got to them. But the long and short of it is the Bitcoin mining community was able to return power back to Texas that would be equivalent to 1.5 million worth of houses. So in that time of need, this whole idea of large flexible load is just a fancy word for use of power, right? They're so flexible, they're not damaged by turning off and on, that we're able to just shut down instantly, and 1.5 million worth of houses is online. And the other reason that that's so important is, in order to have a strong, robust grid, we need to be able to finance the build out of it. So in all these things, the fact that Bitcoin miners are out there asking for more power is good for the grid, because then you have more and more large flexible loads that maybe next time we put 3 million worth of houses back on the grid.
Okay, we're going to move on. And you guys might want, I'm going to play a video from Christine we're going to move on to the environmental impact. And I want to play a video from Christine to introduce it. You guys can go off to the side if you want, or you can sit there. I don't care. I'd go off to the side if I were you. It's only 2 minutes. You ready?
The Bitcoin mining is helping to clean up the environment through its use of stranded natural gas to power the network. When drilling for oil, natural gas is released as a byproduct of the drilling. Natural gas pipelines are built out to the oil fields to provide a way to sell that gas to the energy market. However, when natural gas is stranded, that is, located far from any pipeline infrastructure, oil fields are forced to burn this excess gas in a process known as flaring, in order to prevent it from escaping into the atmosphere as methane emissions. For, according to the EPA, methane is more than 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide at trapping heat. And the latest statistics show that flaring is only 91% effective in reducing these methane emissions. Enter stranded gas Bitcoin mining. By bringing a generator and a simple data box of computers out to the wellhead, miners transform what was formerly a waste product into power for securing the network and releasing new coins. In fact, there is currently enough stranded gas around the world to power the Bitcoin network 7 times over. By utilizing this resource and its source, gas that is currently being leaked into the atmosphere can be captured and put at the service of securing a decentralized global monetary network, providing property rights to billions of unbanked persons around the globe. Through its location-agnostic ability to seek out and soak up stranded energy resources, Bitcoin mining brings industry to isolated regions, removes the need for costly and less effective mitigation measures like flaring, and transforms a waste product into digital monetary energy, all while cleaning up the environment in the process.
Good job, Christine. By the way, you guys can go ahead. Michael Saylor picked this up, and he really liked it, and sent it around, and it got whatever, hundreds of thousands of views. But I will say that I saw it before Michael Saylor, and I posted it, and it was on its way to hundreds of thousands of views. And he stepped on my toes. That's what happened. No, okay, but let's energy impact on the environment has always been a hot topic with Bitcoin. But before anyone up here says anything, does anyone, what are the questions that pop to mind or that you want answered about Bitcoin impact on the environment? Any out there? Difficult questions, easy questions?
About a year ago, I guess there was talk of the McCullis Bluff landfill, and that's self-sustaining off the methane it produces. And I think there's even a waste management facility out in Ferris. Are they viable for mining Bitcoin and the balance sheet in itself?
Yes.
The short answer is it depends and Steve's actually been out to visit some of these sites. So there is some landfills are and some aren't, and I'll let him speak to that.
Yeah, I think the trick there, well, first of all, a lot of landfills that do landfill gas kind of recapture have some kind of government sweetener to do that. And so there'll be a pipeline nearby, and the most economically attractive opportunity for Bitcoin miners are stranded assets. And as Christine's video just said, it's 7-10 times the entire network. So logically, miners target that a little more. However, there are landfills that are more rural, but often the ones that already have that are actively producing landfill. That is the case actually with the one that McKinney's trash goes to. Like, they've already got a pipeline there. So if you're going to buy it from them, you've got to pay them pipeline plus something, and a miner wouldn't be attracted to that. There are other landfills though that don't have that. We know the one outside Temple doesn't, because you can see flares there. Temple in Texas. Another issue or consideration there is the content of the gas, because sometimes it can have contaminants in it, and it makes it relatively prohibitive. And this happens in the oil field too, as well. If it has like sulfur or other contaminants in it, you have to strip that out for a generator to have sufficient uptime to make it economic. So it doesn't mean it won't happen at all. There are companies that are pursuing that. But yeah, I haven't given up. I'm still going to try as part of these university partners, because that would be the way to do it, is more of like a research thing. Like, I wouldn't lead with that as like the most economically attractive near-term opportunity for some of the reasons that I just mentioned. But I am intending to continue to pursue that line of inquiry, because I do think the story, if nothing else, the narrative here would be very positive. And that technology would actually be much better in more third world countries where they have that's a bigger problem. They're not going to have really any pipeline infrastructure for those landfills. So for that, there is promise there, but it'll always be a small subsector compared to like the routine flaring in the oil field is an enormous market opportunity.
Any other?
It's a good question. Thank you.
I know you got some more on.
Rocky, I cut you off earlier when you had a question. I'm sorry. What was your question?
Yeah, well, that is correct. I was just wondering how many miners TBC is partnered with today. And kind of what that work looks like, and you tell your work with them.
Yeah, so there's over 100 corporate members of the TBC. I would say we have 10 large miners, like of significant size, that are maybe publicly traded or privately held, and then another 20 or so that are small, like less than 10 megawatts, but kind of startups, if you will, in the mining space.
So one of the things I learned from your summit was, at one point during the bull run, that because Bitcoin is free market, it basically forces miners to go to the cheapest energy, and most of the time cheapest energy is renewables. I think it was like 60%, which is like 3 times the national average for any industry. What some of the things that y'all have conversations with politicians on about Bitcoin mining with like the recent bills, why has it been invited? Like, I feel like people can bash the Bitcoin community for different things, but why has it been politicians been attacking Bitcoin community on the environmental side when the narrative is completely wrong? Or like some of the stuff that you're talking about as far as environmental comeback. I'm just saying like that's like a big part of the conversation. Like, where is that stemming from? Is it like lack of knowledge, or are there lobbyists? I don't know. Just why has that always been at the forefront of what we deal with?
Well, the first problem is, if they don't see any value to it, then any energy use for like a climate warrior is like a crisis, right? So like the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, she sees no, in fact, it's actually a negative because she's backed by big banks who see it as a threat. So there's that angle. But in Texas, it's a little bit different. In Texas, our primary adversaries are older rural Republicans. They don't care really. I mean, they want the environment to be good, but they're not going to be like a climate warrior, right? They're not going to sacrifice human flourishing at the altar of climate. So their main concern is twofold. One, they may just don't understand it, and they think it's used by criminals. There's that component. Or two, they're actually lobbied by the other heavy industry that uses power in Texas that Bitcoin miners are able to outcompete in the ancillaries. So we don't actually have an issue with Democrats in Texas. We have an issue with rural Texas Republicans who are over the age of 60. There happens to be a few of those in the Texas Senate, and that's where we get our complex around 1751 and other bills. But yeah, nationally, it's totally flipped, right?
Anything else?
If I can make a comment about what you were talking about, the waste, one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is it incentivizes ingenuity and the use of every single wasted resource that you could think of, right? So El Salvador is doing Bitcoin mining, and I know of a project where they're taking the mash from the creation of whiskey, which is very toxic, and you take it. It costs a lot of money to get it out of there, and they're turning it into several different products, including, mining Bitcoin with it, or that's the hope. So that's the beautiful thing, is if it's somewhere, we can monetize it, we can go anywhere.
Yeah, I think what this points out is it's not just, it's capturing gas, which is definitely polluting and significantly reducing the pollution and putting it to get good use. But it's also just the stranded energy piece.
Yeah.
That is so important, because there's a lot of stranded energy that's not flared gas. There's thermal and there's the hydro.
Yep.
And these are, in terms of renewable, these are the best types of renewable energy in the world, bar none. It's just that they're in places where nobody wants to be. And so the beauty of Bitcoin is you just take, and this is what's happening, like in El Salvador and other countries, they take the miner and they put her right by the energy source. And all of a sudden, it starts this huge economic development cycle, and a lot of times for poor countries, because they didn't have anything. They couldn't use that energy. It was stranded.
Which oftentimes, there was a New York Times article recently, and Lee spent hours talking to the gentleman. And so it wasn't because they didn't have good information. But one of the things they often leave off, there's a distinction between on-grid and off-grid. And so the stuff in my video and the wasted, it's off-grid. You can't even get it to market.
Even when it's on the grid, it's interesting because it's hardly stealing. And the reason is, what percent of electricity generated is wasted? 60? It's a big
I think
number.
it's a third.
Third? 30?
Yeah, 33%.
33? Yeah. So, and it's partly because of this peak problem. It's also transmitting energy over wires is really expensive, and you lose a lot of it. Mm-hmm. But 33%, I'm pretty sure it's higher, but at least 33% of all electricity created is wasted. It doesn't get used. And to use it is like incredible. And to use it for something valuable is an incredible innovation. And so even the concept of Bitcoin stealing energy from the grid, which it's totally worth it if it did, in my opinion. But
anyway, banks steal energy from the grid, or
yeah, it's a really important function to have sound money in the world. So it's worth every penny. But just the narrative that's out there sometimes is pretty crazy. But anything else on energy? I know we're over here, and I do want to at least summarize the bills and just summarize them how you see fit, because we're short on time.
Okay, I'll do the flare gas if you want to do the 1666.
Okay.
So, well, actually, no, I'll do those and you do the CBDC stuff. So we've got two bills that passed, House Bill 591 and House Bill 1666. 591 is the flare gas stuff that Christine was talking about in the video. And that clarifies that you don't have to pay severance tax when you redirect a formerly flared gas or formerly flared, natural gas to a generator for on-site consumption. And 1666 is a proof of reserves bill that requires any digital asset service provider that does business in Texas and has a money transmission license to get an attestation quarterly and present that to the Texas Department of Banking. And so it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve fraud and centralized exchanges, but it is a tool in the tool belt that uses sort of industry-derived best practices for us to gain greater transparency into exchanges, which I think we all need at this point. Again, we should all not be keeping our assets on exchanges, but there's still going to be a lot of people that do that, right? So this bill will provide greater transparency. And we had several other bills related to some other things that Steve might mention. We have one on real estate, central bank digital currencies. We tried to get the Lightning bill off the ground. I think we got it filed, but it just didn't go anywhere because there's a fiscal note on it and we just couldn't get it anywhere. But you would do the CBDC.
Hey, on the first one, the severance tax, what does that mean when you say a bill to remove severance tax if you want to convert gas to a generator?
So traditionally, if you are selling gas, you have to pay severance tax to the state on that. But it was unclear if you sell gas from your like formerly flared gas.
Yeah.
If you sell it, then and if you redirect it to a generator to a different company that's operating that generator, even if it's 100 feet away, it's a different company. It's Giga, it's Caruso, it's some other company. If you redirect that, then their question comes to the table: do you have to pay severance tax on that? And so there was a perverse incentive that we needed to remove, and so this bill clarified that you didn't have to.
Okay, so, and the reason this is good is because the people that have flared gas, it's not worth it, or they're less incentivized. Well, I'm just going to lose all of my cut to tax, so I'm just going to keep flaring it. There's no reason
in the time.
Yeah, why spend it?
Yeah. So another,
and that one passed. This
Yeah.
The two that I was mentioning passed. Yeah, we had 7 bills in total that we were tracking, and those are the 2 that did pass. There was others that didn't, but
yeah, another important initiative we had was an anti-CBDC resolution. Now, a resolution isn't a law. A state can't make a law regarding a federal matter, but the important thing to note there is that I went to a meeting in a legislator's office who shall remain unnamed. And the purpose of the meeting was to focus on Bitcoin mining legislation, which is our primary, what we do day in and day out. And the meeting immediately got switched over to how can we be anti-CBDC? Because it's become a political thing now, just making the rounds in the media, which I support because the CBDC is just un-American and unacceptable to Texans. But the idea behind this resolution was to codify that through this resolution that the legislature itself would vote on, the governor would sign, which is a much higher bar than, for instance, what the state of Florida has done, which is to simply add a little amendment to the Uniform Commercial Code. The Uniform Commercial Code doesn't deal with matters of what gets recognized or authorized in terms of currency issuance. The Universal Commercial Code is about perfecting a lien in a lending agreement. So it's a little bit of a political kind of a silly exercise. So the idea behind our effort was to do it in a more proper way that would set us up to start to pressure a lot of our federal representatives and say, why are we silent on this right now, with the exception of Ted Cruz, who's been very vocally against CBDCs. So that did pass out of the Senate committee. I had the opportunity to testify in favor of that resolution, and then it passed the Senate, importantly, with no votes. It was a roll call by voice vote, so it's possible a number of people weren't paying attention and just didn't vote no. But even if that is the case, I think it's fair to say that it had bipartisan support going through the Senate, and unfortunately, as politics play out sometimes, it didn't get a hearing on the House side, which I don't necessarily take to mean that somehow the House is pro-CBDC and the Texas Senate is anti. It's just more, there's 12,000 bills out there. There's only so much time. And it just doesn't appear like it's going to get across the finish line. But I would tell you, expect to hear us be a lot more vocal because, first of all, CBDCs are an instrument of tyranny, and we should resist them in any way that we can. But more importantly, to our mission of advancing Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, if we can position and educate lawmakers that you understand the dangers of a CBDC, well, in order to resist something, you have to have a viable alternative. Like resisting something isn't enough, right? And if we can use that as an opportunity to educate people that Bitcoin is that alternative to kind of safeguard us against the tyranny of a CBDC, and we think it's an effective legislative strategy. So I would expect us in the coming months and years to lean into that more, particularly since, at least at the federal level, they're just completely asleep at the wheel and they're incapable of doing. I don't think the federal government could pass a law that the sky is blue. And so we have to do something at the state level to change that situation.
Any questions on bills or legislative effort or that you guys, I know Eric was doing a lot of, was it Pete? Was Pete? He had some commentary on him. But any questions on that topic? Okay, so here's the final question. I don't even necessarily know how to ask it, but where would we be? There's two ways of asking it. Where would Texas be with Bitcoin without the lobbying, the education, the interaction with the state government? Or another way of answering it is, well, what has been, how has it helped to get those politicians, understanding it and behind it? What doors were opened and how much bigger did it get than it otherwise would have?
So you remember on our very first pitch deck, we had that Brookings Institute graph that showed Texas as a laggard amongst other states. This was like 2017, 2018 timeframe when this was conducted, and Texas was considered a laggard in digital asset policy as a jurisdiction for innovators, all that stuff. And that was another impetus for us to start the TBC because we thought that's not right. Texas is an innovator. We can do better. And so I think we would still be a laggard probably, and this is a little bit of self-aggrandizement, I guess, if you will. But Texas could potentially have been one of the states that just didn't really move forward with this, like California. You really don't hear a lot coming out of California other than crypto companies out of the Bay Area. You don't hear a lot from the policy perspective. California is like in the New York bucket that has sort of resisted this. Texas could have very easily been in that situation as just a big state. Very difficult to get bills passed in Texas. Very difficult to lobby in Texas because there's so many different groups. And we realized there's three things that get you influence and power in politics. There's money, there's numbers, as in numbers of people, and there's passion, the passion that those people have. And so we didn't have a lot of money, so we needed people and passion. And so grassroots politics, getting people out there, like we've done door knocking, like we've been block walking with candidates so that we can build up political capital. Like if you're block walking with the candidate and you're out there sweating with them on election time, they're damn sure going to take your call at like 11 p.m. when the legislature's in session and they're trying to pass a bill on the floor like near midnight, right? That's happened multiple times with different legislators, both in the last session and in this session. We were on a call with Senator Parker
at 1 in the morning.
1 in the morning a couple days ago. The legislature was still in session. At the end, when it's about to end, they stay much later. And the only reason he took our call is because we worked with him and built up influence and made donations and gotten people out to vote. So it is, all politics is local, and those three things, if you don't have money, you got to have passion in politics, and this community has that. And so you guys have that. And so each one of you can be turned into a weapon. That's kind of maybe the wrong analogy, a tool, like an instrument of affecting political change. Because oftentimes, people on Twitter, they amplify messages, but it's a different thing to get out and like go meet a legislator, block walk, send some emails, make some calls, like do things that actually take time. Legislators notice that kind of thing. And when there's enough of us doing that, they actually, this whole idea of a voter, what do we call it? A single issue voter actually resonates when they see that in practice at the ballot box or on block walking or sending emails or making calls. So if you're curious and wondering, like, how do I get involved politically? We can give you scripts. We can give you emails. We can say, hey, your state rep or state senator is good on this issue, but bad on this issue. This is what you should hit them. Like, we can give you all the strategy that you need to become like a political savant. You don't have to, do it on your own, is what I'm saying.
Can I also add to that, just as someone who is very new to being on Team TBC, but watching in admiration from the sidelines for all these years, I don't know if we'll ever really know the full impact of the work that you've done, Lee.
I paid Christine to say this.
Yeah, see, he doesn't. But it's why I approached them. But just another story, we've all seen Lee interviewing Governor Abbott and having him speak on it. And Lee has met with many different politicians. You said when you went to Ted Cruz, he had actually read the books. But how many times have you given out Saifedean's book? And so not only all the work behind the scenes, when Senate Bill 1751, the anti-Bitcoin mining bill, came up, we knew about it immediately. We had a war room at Empower, and at that time, we asked the miners, do you want us to sit on it or do you want us to get loud? And they wanted to sit on it, and Lee could, because he had the relationships, and so much in Austin is those relationships. But just recently, because of the noise around that anti-Bitcoin mining bill, which hopefully is, once the deadline ends next week, if it's not voted on, then we don't have to worry about it. But people have been telling us, well, we're afraid to invest in Texas now because we thought you were such a great Bitcoin mining place, but now we hear this bad thing about it. And so once that's conquered, hopefully you'll help us spread the message. We crushed it, Texas is open for business. But point being that the narrative around a state makes a whole lot of difference. So again, what you're doing here, what you've done, what we'll continue to do together has tremendous impact. The whole world is looking to Texas as Bitcoin country because we've worked hard for that reputation.
Yeah, I think if we weren't organized, and we're organized because of TBC and the member companies being organized, that bill could have very easily passed.
Yeah.
And I don't think we would have, there's some percentage of, it could be 50% less Bitcoin mining here. In terms of just working with ERCOT and getting them to understand early on, and then how fast things moved because there was this coalition explaining it to them and working with them, and just moving so fast, and the money behind it, it was, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we're at. Now, these companies all did, the heavy lifting and the heavy work, but to have it organized and to have the passion organized, as much as I think our government is way too big, and Bitcoin ultimately in the long run doesn't need them, but it's a lot easier to get it done and make progress with the work that you guys are doing.
But yeah, they need to hear from voters to really continue to feel that pressure, right? Because they feel this pressure from like different groups, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, mother against drunk driving, whoever, like, doesn't matter the issue, they know the pressure that they're feeling. So on Bitcoin, they're gonna, the FTX did a huge disservice, and we are still recovering from that in the legislature, like crushed us with the reputation of the industry writ large. And we had a meeting with Lieutenant Governor recently. We had 15 minutes with him, which turned into like 12 minutes. And if we can cut some of this out of the video, I'll say this too. Our political action committee had written a check to the Lieutenant Governor's campaign, and it wasn't like necessarily that we got the meeting because we wrote the check, but kind of, and it was a sizable check. And when you write that kind of check, you think, oh, we're going to at least get a 30-minute meeting. It was like 12 minutes. And the only thing that he wanted to talk about was FTX and what the hell happened. So seriously, we do need to cut that part out of the video.
Okay. Last chance for questions or we're done. Thanks for sitting the extra half hour of what we normally do. I know that can be long, but I really enjoyed listening to this stuff. So thanks for coming, and let's give these guys a hand.
Hey y'all, Lee Bratcher here with the Texas Blockchain Council. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help other people find us. If you like this content, check out the Texas Blockchain Council YouTube channel, as well as following us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.